The human walked slowly through the forest, the moon barely lighting the twisted trunks and tangled roots, her footsteps muffled by the soft carpet of moss and fallen leaves. She felt the chill in the air creeping along her skin and the wind whispering through the branches like a secret she had almost forgotten. She paused when a faint glow caught her eye, flickering between the roots of a massive tree, curiosity pulling her closer. She crouched down, and her heart skipped a beat. There they were, small dragon cubs no bigger than her arms, their scales shimmering with colors she could not name, their eyes, wide and unafraid, watching her with something like hope or desperation. She swallowed nervously, and in that moment the world seemed to hold its breath, the forest around them silent as if waiting for her next move. She extended her hands slowly, the cubs tilted their heads and a small hiss escaped one of them. A darker one with a stripe of silver along its back. The smallest flinched and curled closer to its siblings. She noticed their wings were tiny and fragile looking, and their tails twitched with restless energy. The smell of smoke and wet earth surrounded them, and it made her stomach twist with both fear and fascination. She wanted to reach out to touch them, but something held her back. A deep instinct whispered that these were creatures of power, not to be handled. Carelessly, she crouched lower, bringing herself closer to their level, and whispered a soft sound, just a gentle hum that felt more like a song than words. To her surprise, the cubs inched forward, curiosity winning over caution, their noses brushing her fingers, and she felt a spark as if the air itself had changed. A faint warmth emanated from them, and her chest tightened with awe. She realized they were not just lost or abandoned, they were hungry and vulnerable, and somehow they trusted her already. She looked around for anything to feed them, but the forest offered little at night, only some berries clinging to bushes, and a small loaf of bread she had tucked in her pack. She pulled it out and laid pieces gently on the moss. The cubs sniffed cautiously, then began nibbling eagerly, one by one, their tiny claws leaving marks on the soft earth. She watched them, laughing softly at their clumsy attempts to flap their wings and knock over crumbs with their tails. The stars above blinked through the branches, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a strange connection to something vast and magical, and she wondered how such tiny creatures could hold so much of the forest in their eyes. She sat there with them for hours until exhaustion tugged at her, and she whispered a promise to return tomorrow. And every night after she left, slowly stepping back but glancing over her shoulder at the little dragons who had already become a part of her world, night fell again, and the human felt a pull she could not ignore. She carried her small basket filled with scraps of bread and a few berries, her heart thumping with anticipation as she approached the same clearing where she had first seen the cubs. The moonlight danced on the leaves, casting silver patterns on the forest floor, and the air smelled of damp earth and pine. She slowed her steps when she saw them waiting, their tiny bodies huddled together, eyes shining in the dark as if they had been counting the moments until she returned. One of them, a golden-scaled cub, tilted its head and chirped a sound so high and pure it made her smile, and the others followed with squeaks and soft puffs of smoke from their nostrils. She knelt down carefully, spreading the food on the moss. The cubs rushed forward eagerly, tripping over each other and pawing at the treats as if they had never known such kindness before. She laughed at their clumsy flaps and the way their wings flickered in excitement. One of the cubs tried to nibble her fingers, and she yanked them back gently, pretending to scold them, but the warmth in her chest grew with each tiny touch. The forest seemed to watch silently, the leaves rustling with approval or curiosity. She did not know yet. She felt it in the tremble of the ground and the soft wind around her. The cubs circled her legs and nuzzled against her ankles, and she felt tears sting her eyes at the thought that such powerful creatures could be so fragile and trusting. In that moment she realized her life had changed forever. She stayed until the first hints of dawn colored the sky and whispered promises to return. She watched them curl together for warmth and felt a deep bond forming, stronger than fear, stronger than caution. She turned away reluctantly, but her mind stayed with them every step she took, carrying the knowledge that she had found something extraordinary, something that would call her back, night after night without fail. The nights passed quickly, and the human found herself drawn back to the clearing. Again and again, the cubs now recognized her before she even stepped into the moonlight, their tiny bodies bouncing with excitement and tails flicking nervously in anticipation. One of the cubs, a dark-scaled mischief maker, darted around her feet, almost tripping her, and she laughed out loud as she bent to steady it while the others huddled near the basket waiting patiently for their treats. She spread the food and watched them scramble their claws, leaving little marks on the soft moss, and the way their wings flapped uncontrollably made her chest swell with joy. She began to talk to them softly, telling stories of her life of the village she had left behind, and the sounds of her voice seemed to calm them. Even when they wiggled and chirped like tiny storms, the cubs began to trust her more and more, nuzzling her hands, rubbing against her legs, and occasionally puffing little flames that warmed her fingers. The forest around them seemed to hum with life. The rustle of leaves, the distant calls of nightbirds, the wind brushing through the branches, it all felt like a part of their secret world. She noticed their eyes, sometimes glancing past her toward the darkness beyond the clearing, as if expecting someone or something, but she chose to ignore it, letting the nights be theirs. She felt a sense of wonder that tingled along her spine. Each cub had its own personality, the golden one brave and curious, the silver-striped one cautious and clever, the tiny dark one full of boundless energy and mischief. She began to plan how she could help them grow stronger and happier, knowing they relied on her for food and warmth. The bond deepened with every laugh, every squeak, and every gentle nuzzle, and she began to feel that this strange, unexpected friendship was changing her in ways she could not yet understand. The forest whispered around them, and the night seemed to promise adventures and mysteries that only the cubs and she would share. Together the human began to notice small strange things in the forest shadows, flickering shapes that disappeared when she looked directly at them. The wind carried whispers that sounded almost like voices, and the cubs sometimes froze mid-scamper, their eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the clearing, as if they knew something. She did not. She tried to ignore the unease, brushing it off as imagination, but a shiver ran down her spine each time. The ground trembled ever so slightly beneath her feet. One night she arrived carrying extra berries and pieces of bread, and found the cubs waiting silently, their usual playful energy subdued, their tails tucked, their tiny wings shaking. Slightly she knelt and offered the food, but they barely touched it. Instead they pressed close to her legs and let out soft hisses as if warning her. She followed their gaze toward the tree line, where shadows shifted unnaturally. The branches swayed, though there was no wind, and faint glowing eyes reflected in the darkness. She felt fear prickling along her skin, and her heartbeat raced, but she did not run. Instead she whispered soothing words to the cubs, feeling the warmth of their bodies against her, and realized they were trying to protect her as much as she had been protecting them. The forest seemed to hold its breath, and she understood in that moment that these were not ordinary creatures, and that the cubs' world extended far beyond her. Understanding, she had stumbled into something ancient and powerful, something waiting silently for her to notice it. And for the first time she wondered what kind of mother these tiny dragons had, and whether she would ever meet the force that watched over them from the shadows unseen and immense. The cubs grew bolder each night, darting around the human feet, stealing small pieces of her food and hiding them behind roots and rocks. They chirped and squeaked in delight, rolling over each other in a chaotic tumble of scales and tiny claws. She laughed and tried to chase them, failing as they flitted away like sparks of fire in the moonlight. One cub puffed a small flame, accidentally singeing a leaf, and they all jumped back, startled before bursting into playful squeaks. The human watched them with awe, marveling at their intelligence and mischief, and feeling a warmth in her chest she had never known. Yet every so often their eyes flicked toward the shadows beyond the clearing, and she felt the forest shift around them. The wind rustled strangely, and a low hum vibrated through the ground, as if unseen eyes were watching patiently, waiting silently for the next move. And she began to sense that the cubs were not alone, and their playful games were only part of a larger hidden world she had yet to understand. One night, as the human stepped into the clearing carrying her basket, the forest felt different, the air thick and heavy, with an unspoken warning. The cubs ran to meet her as usual, but their movements were tense, their wings flicking nervously and tails stiff. She knelt to spread the food, but before they could eat, the ground shivered beneath her feet. A low rumble rolled through the clearing, and the leaves trembled on the branches. The cubs froze mid-sniff, their eyes wide with alarm, and small hisses escaped their tiny throats, a sound that made her heart pound in her chest. She looked around, trying to find the source, but the darkness seemed deeper than ever. shadows stretching unnaturally between the trees, and then a roar unlike anything she had ever heard echoed through the forest, shaking the air. It was deep and powerful, resonating through her bones. The cubs scrambled to her sides, nuzzling her legs, and curling close their bodies. Trembling with fear and awe, she instinctively wrapped her arms around them, whispering soothing words, but the rumble did not stop. The wind whipped around them, branches snapped in sudden bursts, and faint glimmers of light reflected off something massive moving beyond the tree line. The cubs chirped urgently, nudging her to stay low and still, and in that moment she realized, without fully understanding, that whatever approached was not just dangerous, it was immense and ancient, and she felt both terror and wonder as the forest held its breath, the ground vibrating beneath her feet, and the cubs pressed against her chest as if sensing the power of the mother, who had always been watching silently from the shadows, unseen and colossal. And the human knew that her quiet nightly visits had awakened something far greater than herself and the cubs. She had come to love. The forest fell into a heavy silence. The human clutched the cubs to her chest, their tiny bodies quivering against her, as a shadow emerged from the tree line, a shape so vast it seemed to swallow the moonlight. The ground trembled with each slow step. The massive dragon moved with a grace that belied her size, scales glinting like molten stars in the faint light, her wings stretched wide, casting darkness over the clearing. Her eyes blazed with intelligence and power, and for a moment the human could only stare, her breath caught in her throat. The cubs chirped softly, pressing closer to her, as if to remind her that they belonged to this creature as much as she did. The mother lowered her colossal head, inspecting them, and then the human, slowly realizing the truth, her heart pounded in awe. The cubs were not abandoned. They had been watched and protected by this immense being, this guardian of the forest and perhaps of something far larger. The air vibrated with her presence. Every leaf, every branch seemed to acknowledge her authority. The human dared not move. She felt small, fragile, and yet connected to this miracle of life. She whispered softly to the cubs, feeling their warmth, and the mother exhaled a gentle plume of smoke that ruffled the human hair in a strange, silent acknowledgement. The forest seemed alive with a new rhythm, and the human understood that her nightly visits had woven her into a bond older than memory, a bond of trust, power, and the promise of a world that few humans had ever glimpsed. The humans stayed perfectly still, holding the cubs tightly against her chest, feeling their tiny hearts racing with fear and excitement. The mother dragon watched silently, her massive head tilting slightly as if weighing the human carefully. The night air shimmered with her presence, and the forest seemed to bow under the unspoken power of her gaze. The cubs chirped softly, nuzzling the human legs, seeking comfort and reassurance, and slowly the mother lowered her colossal wings, folding them around the clearing. Like a shadowed curtain, the ground stopped trembling, and the wind stilled, as if the world itself waited for a signal. The human, in a trembling voice, offered the last of her bread and berries, placing them gently on the moss. The cubs hesitated, then began to eat, while keeping glances toward their mother. The massive dragon exhaled a plume of smoke that swirled around the human, brushing her hair and shoulders. It was not threatening, it was measured and deliberate, a silent test of courage and respect. She realized that this creature was offering a choice, to acknowledge her presence or flee. She stayed rooted, her heart pounding, and whispered softly to the cubs, soothing them with every sound. The mother stepped closer, each movement precise and deliberate, her eyes never leaving the human. Finally, with a low rumble that resonated like distant thunder, she lowered her massive head to the human level and nudged her shoulder gently, a gesture of acceptance and trust. The cubs squeaked in delight and pressed closer to both of them. The human felt a strange warmth fill her chest, a bond forming, not just with the cubs, but with the guardian of the forest herself, and she understood that her life had changed forever, and the nights would never be the same, filled now with magic, wonder, and a connection that spanned the small and the colossal. From that night, the human returned to the clearing with a sense of reverence in her steps, carrying her small basket of food, but also carrying a quiet awe for the creatures she had come to love. The cubs ran to meet her before she even stepped into the moonlight, chirping and squeaking with delight, their tiny claws digging into the soft moss and their wings flapping in excitement. She laughed softly, bending to scatter the food, and watched them scramble, their little bodies tumbling over one another, their eyes bright with joy and mischief. Yet there was always a glance toward the shadows at the edge of the clearing, where their mother waited silently, watching every move with a presence that filled the forest with power and protection. The human knelt among the cubs, letting them climb her arms and shoulders and nuzzle her hair, and she felt warmth spreading through her chest, stronger than anything she had known before. The mother Dragons circled above, occasionally landing nearby, to observe the small interactions, her massive form folding into the clearing. Like a shadowed guardian, every breath the human took seemed to harmonize with the rumble of the mother nearby. The cubs chirped softly at her feet, pressing close, and the human whispered stories and songs to them, letting the night stretch with laughter, warmth, and magic. Each visit became a ritual, the forest alive with their shared presence. The cubs began exploring more confidently, their tiny flames flickering harmlessly as they practiced their wings, and their mother watched approvingly, yet always ready to intervene if danger approached. The human realized that she had become part of something far greater than herself, a secret world of trust, love, and power hidden in the depths of the forest. She felt both humbled and exhilarated every night, as she stayed until the first hints of dawn painted the sky in pale gold, and the cubs curled around her legs and nuzzled her hands, and the mother lowered her massive head, sending a plume of smoke swirling around them as a silent blessing. The human rose, slowly carrying the empty basket, but her heart full, knowing she was bound forever to these creatures and their magic. The forest whispered with life, the stars reflected in the dragon scales, and the night promised countless adventures ahead. The human stepped back into the shadows of the trees, her mind alive with wonder, her heart intertwined with the cubs and their magnificent mother, and she knew that every night would bring the joy of discovery, the thrill of trust, and the quiet power of a bond that spanned the small, fragile, and the colossal, eternal, and unbroken.